I used to think the worst kind of pain was physical. The ache in your bones when the weather turns cold. The sharp stabbing throb in your hip when you try to climb out of bed on your own. The burning sensation when every step feels like you're walking on broken glass. I thought that was pain, until I learned what it felt like to be invisible in your own home. My name is Margaret Williams. I'm 68 years old, a retired teacher, a widow of 20 years, and the mother of a boy I once believed was my life's greatest gift. His name is Daniel. He's 34 now. He lives in my house with his wife Kimberly, a house I paid off with every ounce of strength and every cent I earned over 4 decades. A home filled with memories of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the sound of Daniel's laughter echoing through the hallway. And yet, today is just a building with walls colder than any winter I've ever lived through. A few months ago, I underwent surgery, a full hip replacement. The doctor said it was long overdue. Years of pushing my body beyond its limits had caught up with me. Still, I hesitated to go under the knife. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to be a burden. Funny, isn't it? A mother worries about becoming a burden to the very child she raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights. But Daniel assured me he'd take care of everything. He said, "You'll come home, Mom. You'll rest. We'll be here for you." I believed him. The surgery went well, or so the doctors said. I don't remember much from the days immediately after. Just a haze of nurses, IV drips, and a ringing silence in my phone. No calls from Daniel. No flowers. No messages. I convinced myself they were just busy. People are busy these days. Always rushing somewhere, but never really arriving. When I finally came home, I thought things would feel better. Familiar. Kimberly was the one who picked me up. Daniel didn't come. She barely said 3 words to me in the car, and none of them included "welcome home." As I stepped into the house, my house, I noticed things had changed. The hallway had new paint. The pictures I once hung with pride, photos of me and Daniel at his graduation, my late husband in his army uniform, our wedding day, baby pictures, were gone. Replaced with impersonal frames, abstract art. It felt like I was walking into a stranger's living room. They had moved my bedroom downstairs to the old guest room. "Easier for you," Kimberly had said flatly. There was no warmth in her tone. No smile. Just a statement, like she was ticking off a task on her to-do list. The bed was small, the mattress is too firm, and the window didn't let in much light. But I told myself not to complain. I was lucky to have a roof over my head, right? That's what good mothers say. That's what women like me are taught to believe. The first few days passed in a blur. Pain medicine dulled my body but sharpened my awareness. I noticed things. The way Kimberly would sigh loudly every time I called out for water or help with my walker. The way Daniel avoided coming into the room unless I asked for him specifically. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. "She's going to be like this for months," Kimberly whispered. "We're not nurses." "She'll heal faster if she stops expecting help all the time," Daniel replied. I didn't cry that night. My eyes were dry, but something in my chest cracked open like an old wooden door. That's when I realized my presence was no longer welcome. I was tolerated. Barely. It's strange. I spent my life giving Daniel everything I had. When my husband died suddenly in a car crash, Daniel was only 11. I remember the night I told him. His small hands wrapped around mine. His voice was trembling. "Who's going to take care of us now?" I promised him I would. And I did. I took double shifts at the school, tutored kids on weekends. I wore the same coat for 5 winters just so Daniel could have a new backpack each school year. I was there for every soccer game, every heartbreak, every victory. And now my reward was silence. Each day after surgery was a new test, not just of my healing body, but of my breaking heart. Meals were placed on a tray and left at the door, like I was a tenant instead of a mother. They were often cold. Sometimes they forgot altogether. I began keeping track of the times Daniel spoke to me in a day. Some days the number was 0. There was one afternoon. I remember it vividly. The pain in my leg had flared up so badly that I couldn't move. I called out. My voice cracked. Daniel! Daniel, please! No one came. I waited. Minutes passed. My heart pounded louder than the clock on the wall. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Eventually, Kimberly showed up. She stood at the door, arms crossed. What now? I asked. If she could help me to the bathroom. Her eyes rolled so hard I thought they might fall out of her head. She helped. Eventually. But the silence between us was louder than any words she could have said. And still, I hoped things would get better. That's the thing about mothers, isn't it? We hope, even when everything inside us says it's hopeless. One morning I sat by the window in that small, dim guest room. I watched the sun climb slowly over the rooftops, painting the sky in warm hues. It reminded me of mornings when Daniel was little. He used to sneak into my bed before school, curl up next to me and whisper, "Don't let the day start without me, Mummy." Back then, he was my whole world. But that morning, watching that same sun rise over a cold house and an even colder heart, I realized something had shifted forever. This wasn't my home anymore. And perhaps I wasn't his mother anymore. Not in the way that mattered. It's strange, isn't it? The way a place can change so fast, without moving an inch. This house, my house, it used to be a sanctuary. Every corner once held memories. Joyful echoes of Daniel's laughter, the smell of banana bread wafting from the oven, the soft creak of the stairs as he tiptoed down to sneak a cookie before dinner. Now it felt like a recovery ward I didn't ask to be in. Cold, sterile, and painfully unfamiliar. The first week home after my surgery was the hardest. My body hurt in ways I didn't think possible. My hip throbbed with every shift of my weight. The stitches pulled when I tried to sit up. Even breathing deeply felt like a chore. But I told myself I could manage because I was home, because I was with family. That hope didn't last long. Kimberly was never outright cruel. Not in a way you could point a finger at. No slaps, no shouting. Just quiet indifference, sealed behind a plastic smile and eyes that skimmed right over me like I wasn't there. She'd leave me meals on a tray. Lukewarm soup, dry toast, sometimes nothing but a banana and tea. No conversation. No. How are you feeling today, Margaret? Just the soft thud of a tray placed down and footsteps retreating before I could even say thank you. Daniel, my Daniel, was worse. He hardly came into the room. When he did, his visits lasted minutes, sometimes just seconds. He'd peer in, half his body still in the hallway, as if the very act of seeing me might inconvenience him. Need anything? He'd mutter. I always said no, because what I needed he couldn't give. Not anymore. The pain in my leg I could deal with. I had painkillers. I had ice packs and a walker. But the silence, the feeling of being a ghost in my own house, that was the pain I couldn't treat. Once, during my second week home, A nurse came by for a scheduled check-in. Sweet girl named Jessica. She was young, probably not much older than Daniel, but she had kind eyes. And when she asked me how I was, she meant it. I told her the truth. Not everything, but enough. I told her I was struggling to get to the bathroom sometimes, that my meals weren't consistent, that I hadn't been bathed since the hospital. Her brow furrowed. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at me in a way that made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in weeks. She brought it up to Daniel. I heard them from my room. "Your mother needs more support," she said gently. "Someone should be checking on her regularly. She's not healing as well as she could." "I work," Daniel said flatly. "I have responsibilities." "She raised you, didn't she?" Jessica asked, her voice sharper now. There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "I didn't ask for a guilt trip," Daniel snapped. The door slammed after she left. Later that evening, he came into my room. His face was hard, tired. He didn't look like my son anymore. He looked like a man carrying resentment like a stone in his pocket. "Don't talk to the nurse about private stuff," he said. "It makes us look bad." "I wasn't trying to," I started, but he cut me off. "You're here to recover, not to cause drama. Just focus on getting better." Then he left, and I just sat there, staring at the half-eaten toast on my tray, wondering when exactly my son started seeing me as a problem rather than a person. A few nights later, I had a fall. I tried to get up to use the restroom on my own. It was late. I didn't want to bother anyone. I thought I could manage. But the walker slipped, and I went down hard. The pain shot through my leg like lightning. I cried out. I must have screamed, but no one came for several minutes. When Daniel finally appeared, he didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "You're going to hurt yourself doing things like this," he said, almost like I had spilt something on his new carpet. Kimberly followed behind, arms crossed. "She's going to sue us or something," she mumbled. As they helped me up, every touch felt obligatory. I felt like a sack of laundry being tossed into a bin, handled but not held. That night, I wept silently into my pillow. It wasn't the pain in my hip that broke me. It was the realization that I could scream in my own home, and no one would come running. Not out of love, anyway. You start to question everything at that point. Did I raise him wrong? Did I give too much? Should I have said no more often? Made him learn to struggle? Taught him about boundaries? But it's no use. Regret doesn't change the past. It only haunts the present. Days turned into weeks. The walls felt tighter. The air is colder. I stopped asking for help. Instead, I made do. I'd inch across the floor with my walker, dragging my foot when the pain was too much. I'd bathe myself with a wet cloth and a bowl of water. I'd microwave soup when no one was around. Every time I passed the family portraits in the hallway, now replaced with abstract canvas art, I remembered the woman I used to be, the mother, the wife, the heart of the home. Now I was just an old woman occupying space, and even that I sensed was temporary. But I didn't complain, because the truth was, they weren't just ignoring me, they were waiting for me to leave, to get better, get out, and get on with it. What they didn't know was that I'd already made other plans, plans they wouldn't like. Sometimes, when the house goes quiet, truly quiet, I let my mind slip backwards, back to when Daniel was just a little boy, and I was a young mother with shaky hands and a heart full of hope. Back to when the days were hard, yes, but full of love, full of meaning. It wasn't always like this coldness, this distance. No, there was a time my son looked at me like I was his whole world. I can still remember the first time he said, "Mama." I'd been up all night with him. He had a fever, and I was scared out of my mind. I was 24, alone, broke, and barely holding it together. I didn't know if it was the flu or something worse. The clinic was closed. I held him to my chest and rocked him in that old wooden chair, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. Mama's here." And then, in that fragile, hoarse baby voice, he said it back. "Mama." It was the first time I didn't feel alone in the world. After his father left us, everything changed. There was no time to feel sorry for myself. I had rent to pay, diapers to buy, and a tiny mouth to feed. I worked the morning shift at a diner, the night shift at a grocery store, and somewhere in between, I raised a boy with everything I had. Birthdays were homemade cakes and second-hand toys. But he never complained. On his 8th birthday, I remember baking him a chocolate cake. We couldn't afford the party he wanted, so I set up a small celebration in our kitchen. Just the two of us and his stuffed bear, Mr. Pickles. I'd made paper hats out of old newspaper and stuck candles in the cake like it was the grandest thing in the world. He grinned from ear to ear. "Best birthday ever, Mum," he said with chocolate smudged across his lips. I lived for moments like that. For every time he called out for me after a nightmare. For every art project he brought home. He proudly held it like he'd made the Mona Lisa. I didn't date. I didn't remarry. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because I didn't want anyone to come between us. Daniel was my everything. When he graduated from high school, I was there in the front row, tears blurring my eyes as he walked across the stage. He looked for me in the crowd, smiled and mouthed, "I love you, Mum." How did we get here? When did my sweet boy turn into a stranger? Sometimes I wonder if it started when I gave him too much protection, too much comfort. I never let him see the cracks in me, never let him feel the weight I carried alone. I worked double shifts just so he could have the newest sneakers. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his college textbooks. I borrowed money I didn't have just to make sure he had everything I didn't. Maybe I made it too easy. Maybe I gave him the world and forgot to teach him how to value it. I think about those years often now, lying in this room that used to be my guest room. The one he didn't bother to clean before putting me in it. Dust on the curtains, sheets that smell faintly of mildew. A TV remote with missing batteries. It feels more like a storage closet than a place of healing. But in my mind, I return to those early mornings before school, when I'd wake up first just to watch him sleep for a few moments. Because even in exhaustion, even with bills piled high on the counter, he made everything worth it. I remember walking him to the bus stop every morning until middle school embarrassed him out of it. I remember the night he cried when a girl broke his heart for the first time, and how he buried his face in my lap like he was 6 again, saying, "No one understands me but you, Mum." And I wonder, how do you go from being someone's whole heart to being an afterthought? When did I stop being his home? Did I make it too easy for him to forget who I was? There's one memory I come back to more than I should. The last Christmas we spent as a real family. He was 17. I'd saved all year to buy him a guitar. His dream at the time was to be a musician. I knew we couldn't afford the fancy one he'd circled in the catalogue, but I found a second-hand model online. Still beautiful. Mahogany, smooth strings. The kind of instrument someone had once loved deeply. When he opened it, his eyes lit up. He looked at me like I had just handed him the stars. "Are you serious, Mom? This is for me." I nodded, smiling through tears. "Play something for me." And he did. He sat on the couch, still in his pajamas, hair messy from sleep, and strummed the first few chords of Let It Be. It wasn't perfect, but I'll never forget how it sounded. It was the most beautiful noise I'd ever heard. That Christmas, we stayed up until midnight, playing music, drinking hot cocoa, laughing until our stomachs hurt. We didn't have much, but we had love. And now I couldn't even get him to sit with me through dinner. Now I was a burden, an obligation, a shadow in the corner of his life. The contrast made my heart ache in places surgery never touched. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers those Christmases. If he ever thinks about that guitar, those sleepless nights I spent by his side when he was sick. The peanut butter and jelly sandwiches I packed every day with little note that said, "Have a great day, sweetheart." I remember everything. And that's the curse of motherhood, isn't it? We remember everything, even when they forget us. The days following the surgery were a blur of pain and frustration. I had thought I'd be able to heal quickly. After all, I had always prided myself on being strong, resilient, able to endure anything life threw my way. But this surgery left me vulnerable in ways I hadn't anticipated. My body no longer obeyed me. Even simple tasks, walking, standing, carrying a cup, became monumental challenges. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the slow erosion of the bond between Daniel and me. I had felt it even before the incident. The coldness in his eyes when he looked at me. The silence that seemed to hang over us, like a fog that neither of us could clear. Kimberly didn't help. She never made an effort to hide her disapproval of my presence in the house. One evening, I was in the kitchen, struggling to prepare a simple meal. I had always prided myself on being a decent cook. But with my walker, it was almost impossible to maneuver around the cramped kitchen. My hand shook as I tried to lift a pot. My breath caught as I felt a sudden jolt, and before I could react, the pot slipped from my hands, crashing onto the floor with a deafening clang. I winced at the sound. It was the last thing I wanted to do. Break something, make a mess. But I didn't have the strength to pick it up on my own, so I called out, "Daniel? Kimberly? Can you help me?" There was a long pause before Kimberly's voice echoed from the living room. Her words stung, sharper than I could have imagined. "Why should I? You're just dead weight, Mom. You can't even do anything for yourself anymore. I can't keep cleaning up after you." I froze. Dead weight. Those words hit harder than the broken dish. I didn't want to believe I had heard her correctly, but the tone in her voice left no room for doubt. I was a burden, a nuisance. I thought maybe I'd misheard, but then I heard Daniel's voice, softer, more pleading. "Kimberly, don't." But his voice didn't hold the conviction I needed. Instead of defending me, he was silent. Was this the son I had spent so many years nurturing? The boy I had raised with my own hands? The child I had loved unconditionally? I felt my heart tighten in my chest. The lump in my throat was so big I could hardly swallow. Kimberly's voice cut through the silence again, louder now, as if she wasn't even trying to hide her bitterness. "I'm tired, Daniel. I'm tired of having her here. She's always in the way. Maybe it's time we moved her somewhere else. Somewhere where she can be someone else's problem." Her words hung in the air like poison, suffocating me. Move me somewhere else? Like I was some sort of inconvenience they could just shove aside, just pack up and get rid of? I didn't even recognize her anymore. I stood there, frozen in shock, clutching my walker for support. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. My world spun in slow motion, the room around me growing darker, as I struggled to comprehend the depth of her words. Move me somewhere else? Did I hear that right? Was I just a burden to my flesh and blood? But then, my son's voice broke through the fog. Mum, I didn't mean that. I didn't want you to hear that. I wiped my eyes, trying to steady myself. His words didn't reach me. Not anymore. It didn't matter how many times he said he didn't mean it. The damage was done. No, Daniel, I whispered, though he couldn't hear me from across the house. You meant it. You and Kimberly both meant it. The room felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to let all the pain out, but I couldn't. Not now, not in front of him. I heard him walking toward me, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't face him. My son, the boy I'd raised, was standing in front of me, and I felt as though he was a stranger. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what to say. Please, don't be upset. I turned my head slowly, my eyes meeting his for the first time in days. There was guilt in his eyes. Guilt, but no understanding. It's not about being upset, Daniel. It's about being invisible. My voice cracked with the weight of my words. It's about being forgotten, and not even being worth the effort to love. He didn't respond. There was nothing he could say to undo the words that had already been said. Kimberly's voice was quieter now, but I could hear her words clearly as she stepped into the room. I'm just saying, it's time to think about what's best for us, for our family. We're not obligated to keep taking care of her, Daniel. You've done enough. And that was it, wasn't it? My son had done enough. He had given me what he thought I needed. His pity, his duty. But it was never real. It was never love. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the kind that was deeper than physical fatigue. I felt tired in my soul, tired of fighting, tired of being here, tired of being alone in my own home, a place that was supposed to be safe. I didn't speak for a long time. I couldn't. What was left to say? What was left to do? Daniel eventually walked away, leaving me standing there with Kimberly. She didn't look at me, didn't offer to help. She simply turned and walked away, as if I were no more than a piece of furniture, forgotten and unnecessary. I stayed in that room, the kitchen now a battlefield, the broken dish still lying on the floor. And I realized something that cut deeper than any surgery could. I wasn't just unwanted, I was already forgotten. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The rain had started falling that afternoon, the kind of steady downpour that soaked you to the bone. The sound of it pounding against the window was a constant, relentless rhythm, almost as if nature itself was mourning with me. The grey sky outside matched the storm swirling inside my chest. I hadn't seen Daniel or Kimberly for hours. They had been avoiding me, and I, too, had retreated into the shadows of my thoughts. I was sitting by the window, staring out at the darkened world, when the door creaked open. It was Daniel. He walked in slowly, his face set in an expression I couldn't quite place. I didn't even look up at first. Maybe if I ignored him, he would go away. Maybe if I didn't acknowledge him, the pain of his rejection would fade. But he didn't leave. His footsteps were heavy on the hardwood floor, like the weight of his decision was already too much to carry. I finally turned my head, and there he was, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed tightly against his chest. His face was unreadable, the kind of expression that felt like a wall between us. I could see his jaw clenched, as though he were fighting a battle inside. but it was a battle I knew I would lose. The pain in his eyes was still there, but it was buried beneath something colder, something final. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. "Mom," he said quietly, but the words were sharp, like he was trying to keep them from breaking apart. "We found you a spot in a facility. They're expecting you tonight." I blinked, the words barely making sense at first. My heart stuttered in my chest. A facility? I wanted to ask questions, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't find the voice. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a dry, cracked sob. My throat felt like it had closed up, a pressure building deep inside, threatening to drown me. I couldn't understand. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. I had raised this boy, loved him, nurtured him. I had sacrificed so much for him and his sister. How could he do this to me? How could he decide to send me away without so much as a conversation? But Daniel wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on the floor, his fingers drumming nervously on his arm. He didn't want to face what he was doing. He didn't want to see the damage he was causing. But it was too late. The words had been said, and the decision had already been made. The finality of it was overwhelming. This wasn't a conversation. This was an execution. I tried to sit up straighter, to gather whatever dignity I had left. The walker beside me felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of how fragile I had become. I opened my mouth to speak, but I couldn't find the words. The lump in my throat was so large it choked me. "So, that's it?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between the floor and the door as if he couldn't wait to leave. "It's what's best for everyone, Mom. We've been talking about this for a while, and I think it's time." Time. Time. How long had they been planning this? How long had they been quietly making their arrangements, deciding that I no longer belonged here, that I was an inconvenience? I closed my eyes briefly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. I wanted to yell. I wanted to ask him how he could do this to me after everything I had done for him. How could he turn his back on me so easily? But there was no yelling. There were no harsh words. Only silence. Cold, suffocating silence. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but they all seemed irrelevant now. How could I have let it come to this? What had happened to my son? Was he even the same person I had raised? I could see him shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable, but there was no empathy in his eyes. No understanding, no regret, just the coldness of a decision that couldn't be undone. "Do you even care?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Do you even care what this is doing to me?" He flinched, but his face remained distant, guarded. "I do care, Mom, but this is for the best. You'll be taken care of there. Better than here." Better than here. The words burned, but I didn't have the strength to fight them anymore. I didn't have the energy to argue. It was clear that no amount of pleading would change his mind. He had made his decision. It was final. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind numb. I had thought I could fight it. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, he would see the hurt in my eyes and change his mind. But it wasn't happening. He wasn't going to change his mind. "Tonight," he repeated, his voice clipped now. "The place is expecting you tonight. I'll help you pack." I blinked, still trying to process the overwhelming weight of what he was saying. Pack. Just like that. I was supposed to leave the home I had built for him. the place where I had watched him grow from a child into the man standing before me. But there was nothing left to say. I couldn't change his mind. I couldn't make him see the hurt he was causing. Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for what felt like hours. The steady sound of the rain outside seemed to mock me, a reminder of how insignificant I had become, how quickly I had been discarded. And still, I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to stand, to pack, to do anything. I was paralyzed by the weight of the reality that had just settled around me. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again, the pain spreading deeper with each passing second. But eventually, I had no choice. I had to leave. There was no other option. Daniel had made sure of that. I slowly forced myself to stand, leaning heavily on my walker, the weight of the decision bearing down on me. I shuffled to my closet, where I began to pack, slowly, methodically, as though I were moving in a dream. Each item I folded, each piece of clothing I placed in my suitcase, felt like a small death. A small part of me was still hoping that Daniel would come back, that he would see the mistake he was making, that he would ask me to stay. But I knew deep down that it wasn't going to happen. I stopped for a moment, gazing out the window. The rain had picked up, and I could barely see the trees through the blur of droplets. It felt as though the whole world was weeping with me. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely now, unable to hold them back any longer. One last look at the house, one last look at the life I had built. And then I turned away. I had no choice. There was nothing left for me here. The ride to the care facility was a blur. It felt like the world outside the car window moved in slow motion. Passers-by going about their lives, not even knowing what was happening to me. The cold air outside seeped in through the cracks of my memory, making everything feel unreal. It was almost as though the universe had shifted on its axis, and I had somehow gotten left behind, alone. The building loomed ahead like a fortress. It was a massive structure, modern and sleek, but there was something cold about it. As we pulled into the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being dropped off at the edge of nowhere. There would be no way back from this, I realized. This was it. This was where I would live from now on. The car came to a stop, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the large glass doors that beckoned me. The driver, a stranger I barely acknowledged, opened the door and helped me out. His movements were professional, mechanical. I almost felt like I was just another task to be completed, just another elderly person to be deposited into a safe space. Inside, the facility was clean, perhaps too clean, like it was scrubbed of any warmth or personality. The walls were white, the floors were gleaming, and everything smelled of antiseptic. It was a far cry from the home I had once nurtured with love and laughter. I felt a tightness in my chest as I was led down a long hallway, lined with doors that looked identical. No warmth, no familiar scent of home-cooked meals or the sounds of family. Just silence. The nurse who greeted me was pleasant enough. Her voice soft and practiced. She led me to a small room, no larger than the one I had left behind. There was a bed, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. The room was sparsely furnished, a place where people spent their final years but never truly lived. It wasn't the kind of place where you made memories. It was a place where memories went to die. "Here you go," the nurse said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, Just press the call button. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down on the bed, the cool sheets feeling foreign against my skin. The weight of it all started to sink in. My son had kicked me out, sent me to this place, as if I were nothing more than a burden, a nuisance. I had no one now. No one cared enough to check on me. As the nurse left, I was left alone with my thoughts, the silence of the room almost suffocating. I stared at the white walls, my mind racing. What had I done wrong? I had spent my whole life loving my children, supporting them, and always putting their needs before my own. And now I was here, discarded and forgotten. It was then that I heard a soft voice from the door. "Are you okay, dear?" an elderly woman asked, her face wrinkled and kind. Her eyes held a softness that I hadn't seen in a long time. I turned to face her. She was sitting in a chair just outside my room, watching me with a look of understanding. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a robe that seemed a little too big for her frail frame. She was one of the residents. I could tell by her worn slippers, and the way she carried herself with a sort of quiet dignity. I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of it." The woman smiled gently, her eyes filled with compassion. "None of us do, dear. None of us expects to end up here. But sometimes life has other plans for us." I didn't have the strength to respond. Instead, I simply nodded and let my gaze drift back to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, casting a grey light over everything. I felt as though I had stepped into a fog that I couldn't escape from. Over the next few days, I met more of the residents. People who had, like me, been left behind by their families. Each one of them had their own story to tell, and each one was as heartbreaking as the next. There was Alice, a woman in her late 80s who had once been a famous opera singer. Now, she spent her days in a quiet corner of the lounge, singing softly to herself, as though the music was the only thing that could keep her going. There was Arthur, who had been a mechanic his whole life. He had no family left, and he spent his time talking about the old cars he used to fix, his eyes lighting up as he reminisced about a time when he still had purpose. The stories they shared were often painful, sometimes even tragic, but there was also a quiet sense of camaraderie between us. We had all been cast aside by the people we loved, yet here we were, still alive, still holding on to something. It was strange. These people, strangers to me, felt more like family than the ones I had left behind. I slowly began to find solace in their company. It was a bittersweet comfort. We were all in the same situation, all fighting against the reality of being forgotten. But in this place, there was a shared understanding that transcended everything. The nurses and staff, too, seemed to show more kindness than I had received in years. They smiled at me, spoke to me with a tenderness that felt so foreign, like they cared whether I was comfortable or not. One of the nurses, a young woman named Sarah, would stop by every day to check on me. She had a gentle way about her, always asking how I was feeling, always listening, really listening when I spoke. It wasn't like with Daniel, where he had already made up his mind, where my words felt like they were bouncing off a wall. Sarah seemed to understand that sometimes all I needed was someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge me for my pain. One day, as I sat in the common room with Alice and Arthur, Sarah came over and asked if I wanted to join a small group for tea. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. It felt strange to be invited to something like that, as if, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't invisible. The group was small, just a few elderly women, most of whom were in their 70s or 80s. They had all been residents for a while, and their conversations were filled with stories of the past. They talked about their children, their marriages, and their careers. They laughed and cried together, sharing memories that made them feel alive again, even if just for a moment. I listened quietly at first, unsure if I should join in. But as the tea was served, Alice turned to me and asked, "What about you, dear? What's your story?" For the first time since I had arrived, I felt a lump in my throat, and I almost choked on my words. But then I thought of everything I had been through, everything I had lost, and in that moment, I realized that I needed to share it. Not just with them, but with myself too. I needed to say it out loud, to let go of the weight I had been carrying. "I don't know if I can call it a story," I said softly. "But my son kicked me out on Christmas. He said I was a burden. He said I was too much trouble to take care of." The women were silent for a moment, their eyes softening with empathy. They had all been through similar experiences, each of them touched by the sting of abandonment. And though they didn't say anything, I knew they understood. Alice reached out and patted my hand. "You are not alone," she whispered. "None of us is alone." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't. Not anymore. I sat there in the small sterile room of the care facility, staring out the window at the grey sky. A dull sense of emptiness lingered in the air, but my mind kept drifting back to something that had happened months before. The last time I had spoken with Mr. Grant, my lawyer. The memory of that conversation felt surreal, almost like something that had happened in another life. But the words he had said to me kept echoing in my ears. "Just in case my son forgets who I am." That was months ago, long before the surgery, long before everything fell apart. But when I thought about it now, it was as if I had known then that something was coming, something I couldn't control. The change in Daniel had been gradual but unmistakable. I remember the day I had walked into Mr. Grant's office, my hands trembling with uncertainty. It wasn't easy deciding to change my will. My estate, my house, everything I'd worked for all my life. Who would I leave it to? Would it be my children? Shouldn't they be the ones to inherit everything I had built? But as I sat across from Mr. Grant that afternoon, I felt a weight in my chest, a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Daniel's behavior had changed, his requests becoming more frequent, more insistent. The little things, like his casual comments about what he would do with the house once I was gone, began to nag at me. At first, I thought I was just imagining it. Surely he didn't mean anything by it. But the more I observed him, the more I saw his true intentions. He wanted my house, my money, my belongings. And he wasn't even hiding it anymore. It became clear to me that his care for me, the affection he had shown when he was younger, was slipping away. All that mattered to him now was what he could get from me. That's when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit idly by and let him manipulate me any longer. My entire life, I had put my children first, making sure they were cared for, loved, and supported. But now, with every interaction, it felt like I was nothing more than a stepping stone in his quest for more. I called Mr. Grant to set up an appointment. As soon as I arrived at his office, I could tell something was off. He greeted me with his usual warm smile, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. I had come to trust him over the years, and I knew that if there was anyone who would understand what I was going through, it was him. "Margaret," Mr. Grant began, his voice steady, but tinged with a certain calm professionalism. "It's good to see you. What's on your mind today?" I hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words, but there was no easy way to say it. So I simply blurted out the truth. "I want to change my will." Mr. Grant raised an eyebrow. "Is everything okay? Is there something you'd like to discuss?" I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. "It's Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't trust him anymore. I don't think he cares about me. Not the way he used to, anyway." Mr. Grant didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, as though he had heard this kind of story many times before. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me with quiet understanding. "Do you want to explain what's been happening?" And so I did. I told him about the increasing requests, the comments about the house, the way Daniel's eyes would linger a little too long on things that weren't his. The way he had started to view me was not as a mother, but as a source of wealth. I didn't want to believe it at first, but now I couldn't ignore it any longer. By the end of my confession, Mr. Grant had a pensive look on his face. "Margaret, it's not uncommon for people to change as they grow older. Some families experience tension when it comes to inheritance. But you have every right to make the decision that feels right for you." "I know," I said, feeling a sudden surge of determination. "I can't leave everything to him. I've worked my whole life for that house, for everything we have. But if he only sees it as a way to make his life easier, then it's not going to him." Mr. Grant nodded thoughtfully. "So, you'd like to remove him from the will?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, and I want to leave the estate to something meaningful, something that will last longer than my son's greed." His eyes softened and he offered a small smile. "I understand. And you don't have to worry about your decisions. We can make sure that the new one will reflect your wishes." In that moment, I realized how much this meant to me. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about my legacy. About showing Daniel and the world that there were things more important than wealth. That love, compassion, and selflessness meant more than anything. As the conversation progressed, I made the final decision. I would leave my estate to a children's charity, the one that had meant so much to me in my youth. It was a place I had supported for years, a cause that helped children who had been abandoned, just like I had felt abandoned by Daniel. I wanted to make sure that even after I was gone, my contributions to their futures would continue to make a difference. I'd also like to leave something to an old friend of mine, I added, my voice catching slightly. Her name is Helen. She was there for me during some of the hardest times in my life. She never asked for anything, but she gave me everything. I want her to have something to remember me by. Mr. Grant nodded approvingly, taking notes as I spoke. "It sounds like you've thought this through carefully, Margaret. I'll make sure everything is in place." "Thank you," I said, my heart heavy with the weight of my decision. I just hope that, wherever Daniel is, he understands why I had to do this. I remember leaving Mr. Grant's office that day with a sense of finality. I knew it would be difficult, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. My son had grown too distant, too consumed by his desires. I had done everything I could for him, but in the end, I had to take control of my fate. Now, sitting alone in my room at the care facility, the weight of it all came rushing back. I had made my decision months ago, but now that I was alone, it felt heavier than ever. Daniel had no idea what I had done, and I wondered if he ever would. The thought of him, his anger, and his betrayal still stung. But I found solace in the fact that I had done what I believed was right. The house, the money, none of it mattered now. What mattered was that I had chosen to make a difference, to leave a legacy that would help others. If Daniel ever realized what I had done, I wondered what he would think. Would he regret his actions? Would he even care? I didn't know. But for now, it didn't matter. I had made my peace with it, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Months passed since I made the decision that would forever change my relationship with Daniel. I had adjusted to life in the care facility, learning to find a small kind of peace. The days weren't always easy, but there was something undeniably freeing about knowing I had taken control, even in the face of such betrayal. I spent my time painting, journaling, and meeting new people who, like me, had stories to tell and dreams that hadn't been realized. Life, despite its challenges, continued. But one chilly afternoon, just as I was returning from the communal dining room, I saw him. Daniel. He stood in the doorway of my room, his face tense, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. It was as if he had materialized out of nowhere, just like that. A presence I had pushed to the back of my mind, never expecting to see again. His usual self-assuredness was replaced by something darker, something desperate. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, with a forced calmness. "I need to talk to you." I stood still, momentarily stunned. His presence felt like an intrusion, like a ghost of a time I no longer wanted to revisit. But despite everything, I composed myself. "Come in, Daniel," I said, my voice neutral. "What is it?" He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The scent of cologne still lingered on him, a reminder of the man he had become, one who thought he could buy affection, who didn't even know how to be present when it truly mattered. I motioned toward the armchair beside my bed, my gaze steady, but my insides were twisting. I had no idea what he wanted, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't to mend fences. I've been looking into things," Daniel began, shifting uneasily on his feet. "I noticed some oddities with the accounts. Things aren't adding up. Specifically, the house. I had no doubt where this was going." My stomach turned, but I kept my expression composed. "What about the house?" I asked, keeping my tone calm and even. I folded my hands in my lap, the steady rhythm of my breathing a reminder to stay composed. He looked at me, his eyes shifting between the floor and my face. "Well, you see, I was wondering why it's been left off the market. You've always said that you would give me the house eventually, and I've been handling things, but I don't see it in your will anymore. So I was thinking that maybe we could revisit that conversation." I stared at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words. He dared to sit here, in front of me, asking for what I had already chosen not to give him. And yet, he still hadn't grasped the full picture. He didn't understand why I had done what I had. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes narrowing just enough to catch his attention. "Daniel," I said quietly, my voice sharp with the clarity I had come to possess after months of reflection. "I haven't forgotten what you've done. You didn't just leave me. You kicked me out of your life long before you physically left." His face shifted in surprise, as though I had slapped him. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief that I would even suggest such a thing. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice rising slightly. "I haven't done anything to you." I smiled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't need to say anything, Daniel," I said. The truth is there. You stopped being my son the moment you saw me as a paycheck, as a means to an end. I felt it in the way you spoke to me, the way you looked at me like I was just another asset to claim. His jaw tightened, and his fists clenched again. He wasn't used to hearing this kind of truth, especially from someone who was supposed to be his mother. But I wasn't backing down. I had already made my peace with the fact that he no longer deserved the inheritance I had worked for my entire life. You were left out long before you left me, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice firm, but without malice. The moment I realized you no longer cared about me as a person, only what I could give you, you lost everything. You didn't earn my love. You didn't earn my trust. And you sure as hell didn't earn my esteem. His face went pale. His lips quivered, and his eyes darkened with anger and shame. For the first time in years, I saw him as a child again, caught, exposed and vulnerable. He stood up abruptly, knocking the chair behind him. You can't do this, he spat, his voice trembling with fury. You can't just... But his words faltered as he realized the depth of his actions. I remained seated, calm, unshaken. I already have, Daniel, and I will never regret it. He stood there for a long moment, staring at me as if I had just ripped his entire world apart. Finally, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with such force that I thought the windows might shatter. But I didn't feel a pang of sorrow, no. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. I let out a slow, steady breath, allowing the tension in my shoulders to release. For years, I had carried this weight, the guilt of choosing to protect myself over my son. But in that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had been right to protect my legacy, to protect what was left of my dignity. After Daniel stormed out of my room, I sat there for a while, letting the silence settle around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the sting of regret. I didn't feel that gnawing sense of guilt that had haunted me every time I thought about what had happened between us. Instead, I felt free. I thought about the way I had held on to my relationship with Daniel for so long, how I had tried to mend the cracks in our bond, always hoping that things would get better. But now I understood. Some relationships weren't meant to be fixed. Some people simply weren't meant to be part of your life anymore. I stood up, my joints aching slightly as I walked over to the window. The sky outside was tinged with the colors of the setting sun, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had let go of the toxic pull that had once bound me to my son. I had done everything I could, and now it was time for me to live the life I had left to the fullest. In the months that followed, I found a new sense of purpose in the care facility. I began volunteering more, teaching painting and journaling to the other residents. It was something I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. Now I have time to help others express themselves, to share my love for creativity with those who appreciate it. I became part of a new family, one that didn't require me to give up everything for the sake of others. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly connected to the people around me. The holidays came and went, and though they weren't the same without Daniel, I found solace in the little things. I learned to cherish the moments I had with the residents, the laughter and the stories we shared. In some ways, it felt like I was starting over, building a new life for myself, one that was rich in meaning, even if it wasn't filled with the love I had once hoped for from my son. As I settled into this new chapter of my life, I realized that letting go of Daniel, of the expectations I had placed on him, had been the most freeing thing I could have done. I was no longer tethered to the past. And in that freedom, I found a peace I had never known before. The days grew shorter and winter settled in. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where time seems to stretch endlessly, as if the world is holding its breath. The sun was low in the sky, casting its golden light across the room, warming my face as I sat by the window. The warmth felt good against my skin, a stark contrast to the coldness that had plagued my heart for so long. I stared out at the snow-covered landscape, the branches of the trees weighed down by the frost, the world outside holding its quiet reflection of my journey. I had come so far since that day in the hospital, since the moment I had found myself alone, abandoned by the very people I thought I could trust. For so long, I had been tethered to the idea of family, of what it was supposed to be, of what I thought it should be. But now, as I sat in that room, with the light gently bathing me in its glow, I realized something profound. I was free. Free from the expectations that had weighed me down for decades. Free from the idea that my worth was tied to my children, my husband, or anyone else. I had been the one to carry the burden of others' happiness for too long. And now it was my turn to find peace. My turn to reclaim what had always been mine. My life. My choice. I turned to face the camera, my eyes steady and calm, as though speaking to the viewers in the same way I would speak to a friend. There was no bitterness in my voice, no anger, just a quiet strength, a wisdom that had come with age and experience. You can give everything to your children, I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of everything I had lived through. But never give them the power to define your worth. Never let anyone make you feel like you're nothing without their approval. Because in the end, it's not them who have to live your life, it's you. I paused, letting the words settle in the air. The room felt heavy with the truth of what I had said. I wasn't just speaking to the camera, I was speaking to myself too. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone else. And now, I understood. The only approval I needed was my own. I looked out the window again, watching the snowflakes fall gently from the sky. It was a beautiful sight, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The world outside was still, but within me, a quiet revolution had taken place. I had stopped allowing the actions of others to dictate my happiness. I had stopped letting the choices of my children, my family, control my story. They kicked me out of their home, I continued, my voice low but resolute. But they could never take me out of my own story. The words lingered in the room, heavy and true. My life was mine, and no one, matter how close they had been, could take that away from me. Not my son, not anyone. I let out a slow breath, the weight of it all settling into my bones. The pain I had carried for so long had finally begun to dissipate, replaced by something more powerful. Acceptance. Acceptance of who I was, of what I had done, and of the choices I had made. I didn't need anyone else's validation anymore. I had found my own. As I sat there, watching the world outside, I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome. But now I was strong enough to face them on my own terms. I had taken control of my life again, and nothing could take that from me. The screen faded to black, the soft instrumental music playing in the background as the closing narration began. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go. But when you do, you find the freedom to live for yourself. No matter what anyone else takes from you, they can never take your story. The music swelled gently as the credits rolled. leaving behind a sense of quiet triumph, a reflection of the strength found in reclaiming one's life, no matter the cost. The story was over, but the journey was far from finished.